I call the Committee on Veterans Affairs to order. A quorum is present, and pursuant to Committee Rule 4, House Rule 11, Clause 2, the Chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Our first order of business is reauthorizing the Women's Veterans Task Force through September of this year. Does any member seek recognition to discuss the resolution reauthorizing the Women's Veterans Task Force? The does the ranking member want to make a quick opening statement? Oh,
well, okay. We'll do opening statements after we do the task force. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The resolution is before you to authorize the Women Veterans Task Force, and I urge its adoption. I now recognize Ranking Member Dr. Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's fitting that we are reauthorizing the bipartisan Women's Veterans Task Force today in the middle of Women's History Month and 4 days after International Women's Day. Nowhere can the strength, bravery, intelligence, and patriotism of women be seen more clearly than in the millions of women who have volunteered to serve our country in uniform in every conflict since the Revolutionary War. I am proud of the work that our committee and the task force are doing to recognize, honor, and better serve those women, and I'm pleased to support this resolution to continue that important work. And I move to adopt the resolution.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the committee staff are authorized to make technical and conforming changes to reflect the action of the committee in adopting the resolutions embodying our rules of procedure. The second order of business is marking up the 17 bills on the agenda today. I recognize myself for a brief opening statement. Let me say that I'd like to thank everyone here this morning for working together on so many bipartisan bills before us today that will improve health care and benefits for veterans. So that we can quickly move this markup along, I will give, my remarks are brief as we consider each item today. I now recognize Dr. Rowe for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, we have a very full agenda, so I'll keep my opening comments short. And I very much appreciate the willingness of the chairman to work with me in incorporating the minority's input in today's proceedings, which is reflected in the 8 Republican proposals and multiple amendments that we will be discussing shortly. In addition, we've just reauthorized the Women's Veterans Task Force, and there are 17 bills that we're considering today, and I'll be supporting 16 of the 17 bills, and I'll be offering an amendment to address the concerns I have with one bill that I currently oppose. And with that, I'm going to yield back because we do have a very busy morning.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. I appreciate your accommodation. Without objection, the opening statements of any other members will be included in the record. I now call up H.R. 712.
H.R. 712 to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs.
The text was circulated in advance and pursuant to the committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill will now be considered as read and open to amendment at any time. Is there discussion on H.R. 712? Dr. Rowe?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 712, offered by Mr. Rowe of Tennessee. Strike all after
Text was
the
circulated
enactment.
in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Dr. Rowe, you're recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would require VA to research medicinal cannabis just like the underlying bill would do. However, my amendment does not include the onerous restrictions that the underlying bill has about what the research must look like. My amendment is modeled on a bipartisan bill sponsored by then-ranking member Walz and me, and that unanimously passed the committee last Congress. I've long supported VA researching medical cannabis and believe that my amendment in the nature of a substitute is a reasonable approach to ensuring that the research is performed and that it yields scientifically valid and actionable findings that can help illuminate the clinical benefits, if any, of cannabis on our nation's veterans. Prior to filing this amendment, I spoke with Chairman Takano and Congressman Correa about my concerns, and am grateful to them both for offering their support of my amendment. I hope that all committee members will join me. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. I want to thank you for offering this amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 712. The American Legion, the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, disabled American veterans, and veterans across the country believe that VA should be studying cannabis. I held a bipartisan roundtable on this legislation, too. I support the ranking member's amendment and urge all of the committee members to support it. Does any other member wish to be recognized to discuss the amendment to H.R. 712? Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment to the amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to
Text will
H.R.
circulate in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. Mr. Stubbe, you are recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As medical advances in research continue to show the value of medicinal marijuana for managing chronic pain and other debilitating conditions, it is important to ensure that our veterans have access to these forms of treatment in states where they are legal. I represent a state that legalized medicinal marijuana several years ago by ballot initiative. There are many other states that have done that. I had a bill, H.R. 2191, and the language that is the underlying language in this amendment to the amendment is what was in my bill. I want to thank members of this committee who co-sponsored my original bill, Rep. Cisneros, Rep. Cunningham, Rep. Lamb, Rep. Allred, and Rep. Luria for co-sponsoring that legislation. This legislation codifies the Veterans Health Administration Directive 1315, which currently protects veterans from being denied benefits based on participation in state-approved medicinal marijuana programs. We had situations in my state, and I've heard of situations in other states. I've had situations in my district where veterans would go to the VA and were told or were denied services by way of the fact that they were taking advantage of a state-approved medicinal marijuana program. This amendment to the amendment would codify that VA directive and make it clear in the law that if veterans are taking advantage of a medicinal marijuana program in their state, that they will not be denied benefits or access to their VA benefits. That is the amendment to the amendment. I would also like to thank Representative Correa, which is the underlying bill, for his agreement to my language as well. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stubbe. I will be supporting the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute because it prohibits VA from denying a veteran VA benefits because a veteran participates in a state-approved marijuana program. It also allows VA providers to discuss cannabis use with their patients without veterans fearing loss of their VA benefits. Does any other member wish to be recognized to discuss the Stubbe amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Ms. Lurie, are you seeking recognition? Okay. All right. If not, we'll vote on the first Stubbe amendment to the Rowe amendment in the nature of a substitute, and second on the Rowe amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 712. So the question now is on the Stubbe amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 712. All those in favor of the Stubbe amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the Stubbe amendment is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Is there any further discussion on the Rowe amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, the question is now on the Rowe amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 712. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the Rowe amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The question, I should do that little bang. Okay, the question now is, gotta make the question now is on agreeing H.R. 7 to H.R. 712 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 712 as amended is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Now I recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 712 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority or supplemental, additional, or dissenting views.
Without objection, so ordered. I now call up H.R. 1647.
H.R. 1647.
Text was circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. This legislation, introduced by Representative Blumenauer, permits VA providers to talk candidly with veterans in their care who are interested in participating in state-approved cannabis programs and make referrals and complete paperwork for veterans to participate in these programs. I support this legislation. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there discussion on H.R. 1647?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 1647.
Without objection, further reading of the amendment will be dispensed with. Dr. Rowe, you are recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 1647 would require clinicians in VA medical facilities to assist veterans in participating in state-approved marijuana programs by providing recommendations and opinions to veterans about marijuana use and completing needed approval forms. As we discussed just a moment ago when we were debating H.R. 712, I fully support research regarding the safety and efficacy of marijuana on veterans and all patients, veteran or not. Until that research is performed, it would be nothing short of irresponsible to ask a physician to recommend its use to their patients. Marijuana is considered a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act because there is no currently accepted medical use for it. As VA testified when this bill was being considered last year by the Subcommittee on Health, there is no provision of that act that would exempt a VA physician who assists a veteran in obtaining marijuana, even in a state where it is legal, from criminal sanctions. So not only would this bill require clinicians to act in opposition to accepted medical practice, but it would also open them up to legal liabilities under federal law. It's the ultimate catch-22. It would be irresponsible of us to move forward with this bill on either one on those grounds, much less both of them. That's why my amendment would delay implementation of the bill until marijuana is no longer considered a Schedule I drug under the Controlled Substances Act, and VA certifies that the clinical benefit of marijuana has been scientifically established. And I hope that all of my colleagues will join me in supporting this amendment. And it is, I put myself in the practitioner's seat in my office at a VA hospital. You put me in an incredibly untenable position by doing this. So I would hope that the members would support me, and I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Does any other member wish to be recognized on this amendment? Seeing none, I'll move to my comments. I'm going to oppose this amendment. This amendment would gut the intent of this bipartisan bill by prohibiting it from going into effect until cannabis is removed from Schedule I under the Controlled Substances Act. Representative Blumenauer's bill does not authorize VA clinicians to prescribe or VA to dispense cannabis. It simply allows doctors to candidly discuss treatment options with their patients and allow those patients to participate in state-approved medical cannabis programs without fearing the loss of VA health care or benefits. Is there any additional discussion on the Rowe amendment? If not, the question is on the Rowe amendment to H.R. 1647. All those in favor of the Rowe amendment say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested on the question of agreeing to the amendment offered by Ranking Member Rowe. Is there a sufficient second?
Second.
Sufficient second. There being a sufficient second, a recorded vote is ordered. Pursuant to Committee Rule 4, further proceedings on the amendment shall be postponed. Now move to, I now call up H.R. 2224.
H.R. 2224 to
Without
amend Title
objection, the
38.
first reading is dispensed with. The committee will now proceed to consideration of H.R. 2224, and I recognize myself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a
The
substitute
text was
to HR.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to discuss the amendment. My amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2224, the Homeless Veterans with Children Reintegration Act, puts our homeless veterans with children first in line in the Homeless Veteran Reintegration Program. The wraparound services the reintegration program provides is crucial to a veteran's ability to support a veteran with a child or dependent. This amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2224 contains technical corrections to legislation introduced by Representative Brownlee to conform with the changes in the United States Code since the introduction of the legislation, and I urge you to support it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute shall now be considered is read for amendment and is open for amendment at any point. Is there further debate on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2224? Dr. Rowe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in full support of your amendment that would clarify that homeless veterans with dependents are able to be given priority in services under the Department of Labor's Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program known as the HVRP. This program provides grant funds to homeless veteran providers who offer job training to homeless veterans. The 110th Congress, our former colleague and now Senator John Bozeman authored legislation to create a special grant program as part of the HVRP to provide funds directly to programs who specifically offer job training services to homeless women veterans and veterans with children. This amendment in the nature of a substitute builds upon Senator Bozeman's work, and I agree that it's important to give priority service to this valued population. I hope that by doing so, we can help reach our goal of reaching a functional zero of homeless veterans in this country, and I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. The amendment in nature of a substitute shall now be considered as read for amendment. Oh, I already did that. Is there any further debate on the amendment in nature of a substitute to H.R. 2224? If not, the question is on the amendment in nature of a substitute to H.R. 2224. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in nature of a substitute is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Is there further debate on H.R. 2224 as amended? So the question is now on agreeing to H.R. 2224 as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 2224 as amended is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 2224 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. And without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee's amendment.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority or supplemental, additional, or dissenting views.
Without objection, so ordered. I now call up H.R. 3798.
HR 3798 to
The
amend
text was
title.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. Equal Access to Contraception for Veterans Act, introduced by Representative Brownlee, eliminates co-payments for prescription contraceptives so that women veterans have the same access to birth control as required by the Affordable Care Act. Contraception is preventative health care, and access to contraception is part of providing comprehensive health services. Eliminating co-pays will ensure that cost is not a barrier to all veterans accessing preventative health care. Currently, only women veterans and the uninsured are required to pay co-pays for their contraception. The bill is supported by VA, DAV, IAVA, PVA, and I urge all my colleagues to support it. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there discussion on H.R. 3798?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to HR
Text was
3798.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Dr. Rowe, you're recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As most members know, I'm an OBGYN specialist who spent more than 30 years in private practice caring for women in East Tennessee. Ensuring that women have access to reproductive care, including contraception, that they need is something that I'm very familiar with and supportive of. I am grateful to Congresswoman Brownlee for introducing this bill to create parity between VA and the rest of the healthcare industry with respect to co-pays for birth control prescriptions within the VA healthcare system. I support this bill, and my amendment is a perfecting one based on technical assistance provided by VA to clarify the bill's intent to exempt birth control prescriptions, but not appointments, exams, or other services that might result in a birth control prescription from co-payment requirements. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. I support your amendment to H.R. 3798 because it was requested as a technical correction by VA. Is there further debate on the Rowe amendment? Is there further debate on the Rowe amendment to H.R. 3798? If not, the question is on the Rowe amendment to H.R. 3798. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. All right, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the Rowe amendment is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The question is now on agreeing to H.R. 3798 as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 3798 as amended is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 3798 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority or supplemental, additional, or dissenting views.
Without objection, so ordered. I now call up H.R. 5781.
H.R. 5781 to
Without
amend
objection,
title.
the first reading is dispensed with. The committee will now proceed to consideration of H.R. 5781, and I recognize Mr. Bost to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of substitute at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R.
Text was
57.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of amendment. Mr. Bost, you are recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for putting my bill on the markup agenda today. My bill would close a loophole in the post-9/11 GI Bill that affects some service members and dependents. The problem occurs when the service member does not complete the required service obligation needed to transfer GI Bill benefits and their dependent has already used the benefit. Under the current law, the VA is forced to make the dependent responsible for paying the cost of the benefit they've already used. This means that these dependents are on the hook for debt that was outside of their control. My bill would close this loophole and make it clear that the students should only pay back the GI Bill debt that they created. And my ANS sunsets the change on October 1st, 2026. While I currently don't want to sunset this needed change, it is necessary to complete the pay-go rules. I appreciate the chairman and his staff for working with me to find a way forward on this bill, and I urge the adoption of my amendment. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bost. I support the Bost ANS because it prevents the abuse of GI Bill benefits. The amendment in nature of a substitute shall now be considered as read for amendment and open for amendment at any point. Is there further debate on the Bost amendment in the nature of a substitute? Dr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully support Congressman Bost's amendment to comply with the pay-go rules. I also thank him for introducing this important fix to address the liability loophole. This is the type of good bipartisan policy work that is needed to improve GI Bill rules for our veterans, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Rowe. Is there further debate on the Bost amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, the question is on the Bost amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5781. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the Boston Amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The question is now on agreeing to H.R. 5781 as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 5781 as amended is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 5781 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental or additional dissenting views.
Without objection, so ordered. Without objection, the staff is also authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes. I now call up H.R. 6036.
H.R. 6036 to amend Title 38, United States
The text
Code
was
to
circulated
provide.
in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. When Congress passed the fiscal year 21 National Defense Authorization Act last year, we included legislation providing 12 weeks of paid parental leave for the birth, adoption, or foster of a child to federal employees. Unfortunately, VA determined the legislation in the NDAA did not cover Title 38 employees, VA doctors, nurses, and healthcare practitioners. Dr. Rowe's bill ensures VA Health Administration employees receive this important benefit, and I strongly support it. Dr. Rowe, do you have any remarks supporting your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your including my bill on today's agenda to correct an oversight in the recently signed NDAA that extended up to 12 weeks of parental leave benefits to federal employees, but inadvertently exempted doctors, nurses, and certain other health care professionals working in VA medical facilities from receiving those same benefits. I appreciate that Secretary Wilkie has already committed to correcting this oversight and ensuring that all VA employees are able to use this generous leave that Congress and President Trump intended for them when they add a child to their families. However, ensuring that our intentions are unquestionably clear and enshrined in statute is the right thing to do. I fully support Congressman Allred's amendment, which is based on technical assistance that VA provided after the bill had been introduced, to clarify that the parental leave benefits in the bill are subject to the same limitations as those afforded to VA and other federal workers, and anyway, the bill of those working on a volunteer basis, and I yield back. Well, I got tongue-tied there.
The bill will, thank you, Dr. Rowe. The bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Is there discussion on H.R. 6036?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 6036 offered by Mr. Allred of Texas on
The
page
text was
2.
circulated in advance and pursuant to committee rules. Mr. Allred, you are recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, my wife and I welcomed home our son, our first child, and during that time, I took a short paternity leave. Thank you. Thank y'all. During that time, I took a short paternity leave to be at home in Dallas with my family, and I know firsthand how necessary that time is for new families. But too many Americans don't have that opportunity, and our country should allow parents to stay home to care for and bond with their kids during this crucial time. Letting parents stay home leads to better outcomes for women, men, and families. We took an important step forward with the federal workers in last year's NDAA, and we've got to build on that work to make paid parental leave accessible to everyone. I look forward to continuing that hard work. However, today, I am glad to be joining my good friend from Tennessee, Ranking Member Rowe, and the members of this committee to fix an oversight in the NDAA that unintentionally omitted VA's Title 38 clinicians and providers. Ranking Member Rowe, thank you for introducing this bill, the VA Family Leave Act. My amendment makes technical corrections recommended by the VA to ensure that all of VA's clinicians, including the doctors and nurses that care for our nation's veterans every day, receive the same 12 weeks of paid parental leave as other federal workers. I hope you all join me in supporting this amendment.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Allred.
as an obstetrician, we thank your family for having those and encourage you to have more.
Mr. Allred, do you want to respond?
Is that an order, sir?
Well, thank you, Mr. Allred. And I support the amendment to H.R. 6036 because it provides important technical corrections provided by VA. Supporting this amendment will ensure VA interprets the law so that all Veterans Health Administration clinicians receive paid parental leave under the law like all other federal workers. And I urge each of you to support it, and Dr. Rowe, my personal gratitude for the bipartisan spirit in which you offered this piece of legislation. Is there further debate on the Allred amendment? If not, the question is on the Allred amendment to H.R. 6036. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the Allred amendment is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Is there further debate on H.R. 6036 as amended? If not, the question is on agreeing to H.R. 6036 as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the H.R. 6036 as amended is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 6036 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. And without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority supplemental, additional, or dissenting views.
Without objection, so ordered. Now, without objection, the following agenda items, H.R. 6140, H.R. 6018, H.R. 6157, H.R. 6168, H.R. 5284, H.R. 2816, H.R. 2628, H.R. 1527, H.R. 5750, and S. 3084 will be considered en bloc. I call up H.R. 6140, H.R. 6018, H.R. 6157, H.R. 6168, H.R. 5284, H.R. 2816, H.R. 2628, H.R. 1527, H.R. 5750, and S. 3084. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 6140 to amend Title 38.
Text of the en bloc bills were circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. I would like to take a moment to appreciate the hard work of our committee members. These bills showcase this committee's successful bipartisan efforts to unearth and remedy the challenges facing our veterans, including addressing access to health care, improving the GI Bill, and even improving the specially adapted housing program. I support all 10 bills in this en bloc package and urge each of you to support them too. The bills in the en bloc package will be considered as read. Does any member wish to be recognized to discuss the en bloc agenda items? Mr. Levin, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Takano, for including the Streamlining GI Bill Processing Act in today's markup. This bill would require VA to provide all veterans eligible for education benefits with electronic certificates of eligibility. In November, I visited VA's Education Call Center in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and had an opportunity to listen in to several calls. I heard some veterans and dependents who were unaware of their eligibility for education benefits, or if they had already used some of their entitlement, how much remained. They had to call to request a certificate of eligibility letter with this information to be mailed to them. Veterans deserve more efficient delivery of information about the benefits they've earned, and that's exactly what this bill will provide. I'd like to thank my friend Ranking Member Bilirakis for partnering with me on this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support the Streamlining GI Bill Processing Act, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the en bloc agenda items? Mr. Bilirakis?
Thank you. I'll try to be as brief as I can, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you again and your staff for including two of my bills. The Vet Care Act, as well as the Streamlining GI Bill Processing Act of 2020, which we filed with Mr. Levin. Thank you for putting them on the agenda today. Continuing to update the IT infrastructure for GI Bill claims is one of my top priorities. I'm glad that my bill to ensure the student veterans are able to access their certificates of eligibility online is being included in this process. Additionally, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for including the Vet Care Act, which would expand on existing research to determine the potential health benefits, in this case, better outcomes for veterans with type 2 diabetes and VA cost savings associated with preventative dental care via a four-year pilot program. The bill also puts in statute the authority for the VA to provide administrative support and coordination of care to local community providers at low or no cost to the veteran. I urge my colleagues to support this en bloc package. Mr. Chairman, before yielding back, I'd like to take a moment to talk about H.R. 3504, the Ryan Cools Specialty Adaptive Housing Improvement Act of 2019, which was hotlined out of the Senate. Yes, finally. This piece of legislation was passed by the House in July of 2019. H.R. 3504 would make needed improvements to the Specially Adaptive Housing Program. It would double the number of times a veteran can use an SAH grant, increase the base amount of the funding available to veterans by 15%, and would authorize VA to provide additional funding for veterans 10 years after they use the SAH grant. And of course, this is a priority. I'm going to skip over the rest of my remarks, but this is a priority of the Wounded Warrior Project. Thank you so very much for cooperating with us, Mr. Chairman, and I want to also thank the ranking member. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bilirakis. Ms. Luria, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Rowe, for considering two of my bills in this markup today. The first is the Veterans Compensation Cost of Living Adjustment Act of 2020. This bill would increase compensation to veterans who incurred injuries during their service. It includes benefits such as disability compensation, clothing allowance, and dependency and indemnity compensation. I was proud to carry this legislation and that we passed this needed cost of living adjustment for our veterans last year, and look forward to passing that out of the committee and into law again this year. The second bill is the Transparency for Student Veterans Act. This bill would empower veterans to choose the best higher education options for them. It would bring together, in an easy-to-access website format, information from multiple federal agencies, such as employment outcomes and other success metrics, so that veteran students can make the best choices in choosing their education and using their VA benefits. Thank you again, and I look forward to the passage of these two crucial bills to continue to help our veterans.
Thank you, Ms. Luria. Is there I know Ms. Underwood is the one on the Republican side. Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. I was proud to introduce the Veterans in STEM Act with my colleague from Kentucky, Representative Barr. As members of a committee dedicated to Veterans Affairs, it's our responsibility to do the most that we can to best set veterans up for success in their transition into the civilian workforce. Careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are growing in demand. Some of these areas may require additional training that would not necessarily be covered under what is remaining of their GI Bill. The Edith North STEM Scholarship was created for students training in high-demand STEM fields. The Veterans in STEM Act is intended to expand accessibility of the Edith North STEM Scholarship to qualifying veterans. I'm proud that my bill, H.R. 6140, not only increases the pool of veterans eligible for the scholarship, but also expands the types of programs that are covered by the scholarship. Veterans bring diverse experiences and tools to our civilian workforce. In addition to this scholarship bringing additional opportunities for career growth, we are increasing the impact that our veterans have on our community. This legislation will provide eligible veterans and FRI scholars with up to 9 additional months of benefits to their post-9/11 GI Bill to complete their training in STEM program. And additionally, this bill corrects an issue with the language in the original scholarship under the VA interpretation, made students in medical residency programs ineligible for the STEM scholarship. The Veterans in STEM Act will help open the door to the STEM workforce and allow our talented veterans to fill some of the gaps in jobs currently being outsourced abroad. We have a collective responsibility to support our veterans when they return home, and the Veterans in STEM Act creates additional opportunities for them. I'm committed to supporting our veterans and I'm proud to introduce this bipartisan legislation, which will further broaden the paths they are able to choose from in transitioning into our workforce. I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. Any further discussion on the en bloc agenda items? Hearing no further discussion, the question is on agreeing to H.R. 6140, H.R. 6080, let me say it again. The question is on agreeing to H.R. 6140, H.R. 6018, H.R. 6157, H.R. 6168, H.R. 5284, H.R. 2816, H.R. 2628, H.R. 1527, H.R. 5750, and S. 3084. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 6140, H.R. 6018, H.R. 6157, H.R. 6168, H.R. 5284, H.R. 2816, H.R. 2628, H.R. 1527, H.R. 5750, and S. 3084 are agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to confuse our members, I'm going to read these in a different order, see if they're awake.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 1527, H.R. 2628, H.R. 2816, H.R. 5284, H.R. 5750, H.R. 6018, H.R. 6140, H.R. 6157, H.R. 6168, and S. 3084 be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority, supplemental, additional, or dissenting views on these bills.
Without objection, so ordered. Without, let's see, I now call up H.R. 5766.
H.R.
Without objection, the
5766.
first reading is dispensed with. The committee will now proceed to the consideration of H.R. 5766, and I recognize Mr. Levin to offer his amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5622.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5766 at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R.
Text was circulated in
5766.
advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the substitute will be considered as original text for purposes of amendment. Mr. Levin, you're recognized for 5 minutes in support of your amendment.
Mr. Chairman, Congress created the VetTech pilot program in 2017 as part of the Harry Colmary Veterans Educational Assistance Act, also known as the Forever GI Bill. VetTech offers veterans the chance to learn computer software, information science, computer programming, data processing, and media applications. The original legislation required that providers exist for 2 years prior to participating in the program. This goal was laudable and was intended to ensure that veterans' benefits and time were not wasted. However, it also made it difficult for new providers to participate. As introduced, H.R. 5766 eliminates this 2-year requirement and expands eligibility for the program. My amendment in the nature of a substitute further improves the base text by instead judging providers on real metrics. Under my ANS, providers must demonstrate to VA how they will ensure veterans' careers will benefit from participating in the Vet Tech program. That means tailoring their programs to the job market, providing veterans with relevant industry experience, and showing that they can effectively teach veterans the skills they need. One of the main goals of our work on the Economic Opportunities Subcommittee is protecting veterans' benefits, and this ANS builds off the work I have accomplished in concert with Ranking Member Bilirakis. I thank Leader McCarthy for his work on this legislation, and I urge support for my ANS. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. The Veteran Employment through Technology Education Courses Expansion Act, or the Vet Tech Expansion Act, improves the Vet Tech pilot program to better work for veterans using the high-tech educational program and increase the number of providers that exist for the program. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5766 adds safeguards to the program to ensure that educational providers can provide quality classes for jobs that will actually exist. I strongly believe that if we are using earned educational benefits, we must be providing an education that a veteran can use. Fly-by-night coding boot camps with no oversight fail that standard, and that's why this legislation is so important. I support the 11th Amendment in the nature of a substitute, and each of you to support it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute shall now be considered as read for amendment and open for amendment at any point. Is there further debate on the 11th Amendment in the nature of a substitute? Dr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that the Vet Tech High Technology Pilot Program is one of the most important yet lesser-known provisions of the Forever GI Bill, which many in this room worked very hard to enact in 2017. This pilot program authorizes VA to provide a pathway for high-technology programs like coding boot camps and other training to be eligible for GI Bill-style funds. The program is also designed to ensure employment for students once they've completed their program by prorating 50% of the tuition and fees payment to the school until the student finds a job in a high-tech field. This pilot program continues to be championed by my friend Leader McCarthy, and I'm pleased that he introduced this bill to make some important tweaks to ensure certain schools and training programs can participate in the program while ensuring quality. These changes came to the committee's attention after conversations with VA staff in Buffalo about how to improve this pilot program. I want to thank Representative Levin for his compromise amendment, and it has my full support, and I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the item before us? If not, the question is on the 11th Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5766. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the 11th Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5766 is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The question is now on agreeing to H.R. 5766 as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 5766 as amended is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I now recognize Ranking Member Rowe for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 5766 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee's amendments.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, give notice of intent to file minority of supplemental, additional, or dissenting views.
Without objection, so ordered. So we will now proceed to the unfinished business. Recorded votes were ordered on Rowe Amendment to H.R. 1647. Question now occurs on agreeing to the Rowe Amendment to H.R. 1647, on which a recorded vote was ordered. The clerk shall call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman votes no. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice? Mr. Lamb? Mr. Lamb votes no. Mr. Levin? Mr. Levin votes no. Mr. Brindisi? Mr. Brindisi votes no. Mr. Rose? Mr. Rose votes no. Mr. Pappas? Mr. Pappas votes no. Ms. Luria? Ms. Luria votes no. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes no. Mr. Cunningham? Mr. Cunningham votes no. Mr. Cisneros? Mr. Cisneros votes no. Mr. Peterson? Mr. Peterson votes no. Mr. Sablon? Mr. Sablon? Mr. Allred? Mr. Allred votes no. Ms. Underwood? Ms. Underwood votes no. Mr. Rowe?
Aye.
Mr. Rowe votes aye. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes aye. Ms. Rattawagen? Ms. Rattawagen votes yes. Mr. Bost? Mr. Bost votes aye. Mr. Dunn? Mr. Dunn votes aye. Mr. Bergman? Mr. Bergman votes aye. Mr. Banks? Mr. Banks votes yes. Mr. Barr? Mr. Barr votes aye. Mr. Muser? Mr. Muser votes aye. Mr. Watkins? Mr. Watkins votes aye. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Stubbe votes yes.
How is Mr. Sablon recorded?
Mr. Sablon is not recorded. Mr. Sablon votes no. Okay. Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 12 ayes and 14 noes.
Are there any members who wish to change their votes? The amendment is not agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The question is now on agreeing to H.R. 1647. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1647 is agreed to.
Request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested on the question of agreeing to H.R. 1647. Is there a sufficient second? There being a sufficient second, a recorded vote is ordered. The clerk shall call the roll.
Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman votes aye. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice? Mr. Lamb? Mr. Lamb votes aye. Mr. Levin? Mr. Levin votes aye. Mr. Brindisi? Mr. Brindisi votes aye. Mr. Rose? Mr. Rose votes aye. Mr. Pappas? Mr. Pappas votes aye. Ms. Luria? Ms. Luria votes aye. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Cunningham? Mr. Cunningham votes aye. Mr. Cisneros? Mr. Cisneros votes aye. Mr. Peterson? Mr. Peterson votes aye. Mr. Sablon? Mr. Sablon votes aye. Mr. Allred? Mr. Allred votes aye. Ms. Underwood? Ms. Underwood votes aye. Mr. Rowe?
No.
Okay. Mr. Rowe votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Ms. Rattawagen?
No.
Ms. Rattawagen votes no. Mr. Bost? Mr. Bost votes no. Mr. Dunn? Mr. Dunn votes no. Mr. Bergman? Mr. Bergman votes no. Mr. Banks? Mr. Banks votes no. Mr. Barr? Mr. Barr votes no. Mr. Muser? Mr. Muser votes no. Mr. Watkins? Mr. Watkins votes no. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Stubbe votes yes.
Are there any members who wish to change their votes? The clerk shall report the vote.
All right, Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 15 ayes and 11 noes.
H.R. 1647 is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. I recognize Vice Chairman Lamb for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 1647 be reported favorably to the House.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes in the committee amendments. You want to say your?
Recorded vote, yeah.
Okay.
Recorded, in the opinion of the chair?
No.
Oh, a recorded vote is requested on the, on agreeing to the motion. Is there a sufficient second?
Yes.
There being a sufficient second, a recorded vote is ordered. The clerk shall call the roll.
All right. Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman votes aye. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice? Mr. Lamb? Mr. Lamb votes aye. Mr. Levin? Mr. Levin votes aye. Mr. Brindisi? Mr. Brindisi votes aye. Mr. Rose? Mr. Rose votes aye. Mr. Pappas? Mr. Pappas votes aye. Ms. Luria? Ms. Luria votes aye. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Cunningham? Mr. Cunningham votes aye. Mr. Cisneros? Mr. Cisneros votes aye. Mr. Peterson? Mr. Peterson votes aye. Mr. Sublime? Mr. Sublime votes aye. Mr. Allred? Mr. Allred votes aye. Ms. Underwood? Ms. Underwood votes aye. Mr. Rowe?
No.
Mr. Rowe votes no. Mr. Bilirakis? Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Ms. Rattawagen?
No.
Ms. Rattawagen votes no. Mr. Boss? Mr. Boss votes no. Mr. Dunn? No. Mr. Dunn votes no. Mr. Bergman? Mr. Bergman votes no. Mr. Banks? Mr. Banks votes no. Mr. Barr? Mr. Barr votes no. Mr. Muser? Mr. Muser votes no. Mr. Watkins? Mr. Watkins votes no. Mr. Roy?
Sorry.
Could you have some,
Mr. Roy, we are to report the bill favorably to the House.
Okay. No.
Mr. Roy votes no. Mr. Stubbe?
which bill? The bill that we just reported out?
The bill we just voted,
So
that we just passed.
1647?
We're voting,
Yes,
Then I'm yes.
1647. We are voting to report it to the House. How is Mr. Stubbe recorded?
Mr. Stubbe is a yes.
Okay, thank you. Does any member wish to change his or her vote? Or their vote? The clerk shall report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, for this vote, there are 15 ayes and 11 noes.
The motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes. Dr. Rowe, you wish to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, give notice of intent to file minority, supplemental, additional, or dissenting views.
All right. Let me thank everyone for being here today. Mr. Roy? Mr. Roy?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, appreciate it. I wasn't here earlier for the debate, and we went through the votes. I apologize for that. I just wanted to make a statement for the record and observation on the cannabis vote, because as a cancer survivor, I'm pretty sympathetic to wanting to allow individuals to have access to drugs that will make them feel better, and want to figure out and explore this further. Certainly want veterans to be able to have access to that sort of thing. I just think it's misguided for us to be telling federal employees, work for the VA, to be promoting something that's a Schedule I substance. And so I think we need to have a robust debate about what we're doing that. I've seen that on the floor of the House where we try to back end this deal saying we can finance it through banking. There's all sorts of different ways people are trying to keep promoting this agenda. That's fine. Let's have a debate on the agenda, but let's debate Schedule I. I just think it's important that we not have cross currents going on in our federal government about whether it's legal or not. I'm a big states' rights guy. I'd like to let Texas make decisions. Colorado can do what it wants to do. Texas can do what it wants to do. That's all fine. And there's a lot to explore here. But I do think it's important that we not be sending mixed messages, and we are by doing this, in my opinion. But I thank the chairman for the time.
All right. General Bergman?
In the interest of time and brevity, I would echo Mr. Roy's comments to the word. Thank you.
Mr. Sablon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to mention and congratulate Mr. Bilirakis, whose bill HR 3504 passed the Senate last night, and that bill includes in it the language that allows license and certification prep courses to be covered by the GI Bill. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
One quick comment.
Dr. Rowe?
Just a quick comment. We're obviously undergoing a with the coronavirus epidemic, it's created some issues that I think our committee needs to look at. And under current law, students using the GI Bill whose school closes or and many universities are, or transitions to an online curriculum because of the coronavirus, could have their monthly housing allowance reduced or stopped receiving benefits altogether. No veteran spouse or child who relies on the GI Bill should have to worry about their benefits being reduced or cut off because of this crisis. My bill, H.R. 6194, would give the VA the authority to hold those students harmless so they continue receiving the benefits they need. Congress has to act quickly to provide these students, so I'm working closely with the chairman, the House leadership, and our colleagues in the Senate VA committee to get it done. And I want to thank the Student Veterans of America, the VFW, the Veteran Education Success, TAPS, National Association of Veteran Program Administrators, and others for their continued support of my bill. I hope that we can put politics aside and include it in the coronavirus emergency response package. I know that we have Leader McCarthy's support for that, and I ask my friends on the other side of the aisle to help make sure that we have the Speaker's support as well. And with that, I yield back.
All right. Anything else? All right. Before I adjourn the meeting, let me just say, let's all be safe. Safe travels home. Now's the time to rise above our normal ways of operating. Wash your hands. I was told to wash your hands before you go to the bathroom and after. So add the before part. Dr. Rowe, you're the expert. Tell us what we ought to be doing.
This is, you know, we've just, for you all, we've seen these epidemics before and we'll see them again. And obviously, we need an all-hands-on-deck approach. And one of those all-hands-on-deck things are things that we can do. And we can not go to large meetings, and I saw where one governor was going to limit it to 200. That makes no sense at all to me. We should, you know, try to stay away. And I did yesterday. I met Dr. Moynihan on the way, and the first thing I did was stick my hand out, and he gave me the Vulcan sign. And so I'm going to have to improve what I do, and certainly just simple hand washing, covering your mouth if you cough or sneeze. If you feel bad, stay home. Look, how many times have all of us come to Congress sick? I bet everybody in this room has. I know I've gone to my office and seen patients when I had a cold or whatever. I shouldn't have, but I did. And we need to just use common sense. And I feel very positive this country will be able to handle this. I really do. We got a little lucky on this. There's a very slow rise of this, and I think it won't overwhelm our hospital system. What happened in Italy was a lot of people got infected, and very quickly their rate went up and just overwhelmed their capacity to take care of patients. So I feel good about our ability to do that. We have been slow on the testing kits. There's no question we need to get those out to practitioners like myself and Dr. Dunn and others who see patients every day. But I think we need to go back and get the temperature down. And as this chairman said, it's all hands on deck. This has got nothing to do with Republican, Democrat, Independent, or anything. This is about the American people and the healthy American people. And certainly we want to be positive. I think it's good that we're probably going away. I think next week, probably many of you, as I am, are doing a roundtables with our folks locally, what they're planning to do, our hospitals, our public health systems, our emergency responders, our law enforcement people, they're all involved. So I would encourage you to do that, and safe travels. Everybody take care of yourself, and you know, we're all in this together, and certainly I think we'll come out together. I yield back.
Dr. Rowe, I appreciate your expertise, and I appreciate the way in which we as a committee and our minority staffs have worked together to help the VA prepare for this. I know the VA is taking a number of preventative measures with our nursing home, veterans homes, and our community living centers. And Dr. Stone is exercising, I think, some very prudent caution in implementing procedures to make sure that we don't lose any operational capacity at our more than 170 medical centers across the country. Safe travels home. This meeting is now adjourned. we'll do this.
He did, he walks up.
We'll do-